Oh, that is something I'm so glad you asked me about that. I love to talk about it. It's something I'm super, I mean, it was like a life highlight for me, not even just a career highlight, getting to do that. There are so many speakers who have had really huge life-changing moments. And it could be from, they're all getting big ideas out into the world and they all will say things like they received many emails. I know someone who talked about, um, um, suicide and talked about a lot of lives that saved people who wrote to him and said that listening to the talk saved their life. So that's like
Yeah.
that's an incredible and powerful thing to hear as a speaker. Like how, as that's not really, it's not true that TED really looks for a lot of people who are,
Yeah.
just people who have good ideas and sort of credibility to get up there and share them and to talk about them in a way that is really giving a gift to the audience. Like, what can the audience take away from what the talk? What will they
Yeah.
walk out and think about? What will they walk out and talk about? What will they walk out and do? And I had this one kind of foundational experience. Pursuing TEDx's in your community is a great idea. Getting to know organizers, or if there's if there are business conferences in your field, or just really kind of doing outreach, and then thinking about. I think it's really important to think about, when public speaking and presentations can help everybody, and they can also be really, really fun. And it's just worth trying. If it feels scary, figure out a way to do it that doesn't feel super overwhelming, but get started, because I think I have just seen so much joy around it, so much impact.
Sometimes you just have a conversation that gives you joy. And this is one of those conversations. If you want to be inspired to become a public speaker, then my guest today, Kelly Stoetzel, is somebody that you need to listen to. I know Kelly from my time at Prezi. Kelly was leading the TED Talks conference program. Not many people know this, but TED was one of the early investors in Prezi. So we used to support any speaker who wanted to use Prezi for their TED Talk. Now, Kelly is a presentation and speaking powerhouse. She's played a significant role in shaping the influential TED Talks program for more than 17 years, leading the curation team, and saw firsthand the true power of being a great speaker. Speak on the TED stage and your idea can spread fast, really fast. Kelly has also spoken on big stages all around the world and has a mission about inspiring young people to change their world or change the world through experiencing inspiring talks, content, and experiences. Her work with the TED Youth Program and the work she's doing now as Managing Director, Edelman Fossil Park and Museum in New Jersey is a testament to this. Kelly is deeply committed to creating educational and inspiring content for young people. When I was thinking about who I wanted to interview for my new book, Kelly was at the top of the list. She, more than anyone, has seen firsthand the superpowers that being a great public speaker, storyteller, and presenter can give you. Enjoy. Kelly, welcome. Really great to see you.
Thank you, Spencer. It's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So I have been super excited waiting for this conversation. I've been doing my kind of research and stalking you all over the internet for your for some gems. And I thought it'd be like a good place to start. If you could share with the audience a little bit maybe about the early stage of your career and how you first started to cut your teeth in a litigation firm of all places. Because I think that's kind of like maybe a really good segue to talk about moments when you suddenly realize something's important. But so I'd love for you to share a bit.
Okay, sure. So, well, very early on, I mean, when I graduated from college, I started off in the art world for a little bit, and I loved it, and I just happened, I worked for a gallery that moved away, and I just needed a job, And I had a friend who worked in litigation consulting, and she was like, well, you can, if you want to come work here, you could get a job. You could get a job here. Like I was just, I was an assistant there. I didn't know what I was doing. And I had majored in communications in college, but I didn't have like a whole lot of experience with it. So I joined a litigation consulting firm, and what they do is, a part of it's jury consulting, and then the other part of it is demonstrative evidence that they use in the courtroom for trials and help prepare attorneys for their presentations. And so I ended up like getting really interested in that and started learning a lot about visual communication. So I worked on a lot of trials. This was back in the 90s, and I'll admit.
Yeah, I
So
remember them well.
yes, yes. So I worked on a bunch of trials working on multimedia presentations and, video animations and graphics that attorneys would use to take these really complex, like corporate questions and, distill them to an audience. I mean, a jury. And so, and I really got interested in it. I mean, I really loved it. And I saw like the power of taking these complex ideas and just streamlining them into, a format that told, in this case, a visual story. And the way that that would help people sort of understand something that's really tricky. And, just like how effective that was. So that was really interesting and really fun part about it. And then there were a lot of not so fun things about it too.
I can imagine.
It's a tough business. Back in the day, I had to wear a pager, and I would sometimes get paged in the middle of the night for like a graphics emergency, for someone that was going to trial the next day, and and that sort of thing. But also, I think they I was at that time communicating someone else's ideas and what was important to someone else, and and I was the one sort of doing that. So I eventually, like, it was a great start. I learned a lot of things that were really useful in terms of how we communicate, and it was totally foundational for me. But doing it in that arena was not what I then,
Eventually wanted to do.
eventually wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think it's super interesting that that specific job that you had to do, it almost forces you to think like, okay, I need to put myself into the shoes of the jury, to think like, how do I explain it to them in a way that they understand, that resonates, that, does the job of persuasion in a way. So I think it's like, it must have been like an amazing starting point to understand how people work and how I get a message across.
Absolutely was. It absolutely was, because you get in there and become an expert on a thing for a chunk of time, but the figuring out what the elements are that are really important, that are going to resonate with somebody, that somebody, and like you say, putting yourself in the shoes of the jury, and thinking about what's going to connect, what'll stick with them,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
was the really fun part.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like I'm always, I think most people that I speak to who've done a lot of speaking, there is like moments in your life where it's what I call, it's a big word, but like a pivotal moment where you suddenly realize the power that this skill has. And that actually the more you think about it, the more you learn about it, actually it starts to develop and have, become even more powerful in a way. Would you reckon, is that something that you found at that moment, or was there other moments where you suddenly realized the power of communication?
That's a good question. I think to some degree I realized it then. I then went on and went back to the art world for a little bit after that. So I didn't go straight back into communication after that, but there were a lot of things from that I took and that I recognized were really important. And at the same time, like when I left there, I started attending the TED conference.
Yeah.
Um, and this was before I later went on to work there, but and it was there, I think, that I realized, that people with all sorts of, you know, like work that would be seemingly disconnected. You might have someone who is an expert on, the internet, and then the next speaker was an expert on ants. And
Yeah.
actually, when they give two talks, they're in some ways related, and the knowledge from the two different things allows you to think about new ideas. You think about
Yeah.
how those two things could be connected, and then what does that make you think? And so I think then it was actually in some ways in attending TED that I looked back and thought about my work, um, that I had done in litigation consulting and communications, and then I started to think, okay, now I really see what this can do and all the places where this is useful. Some of it was in the early days and in the litigation consulting job, it was like like I said, it was sort of foundational, and it was the things you learn in the beginning of your career. But then the light bulb moment may have probably been a little later when I started to attend TED.
TED. Yeah. And we should definitely talk about TED, because it was obviously a huge part of your life for quite some time. Before we get there, I wanted to, and we spoke about this earlier, but I just wanted to touch on, you did a TEDx talk at TEDx-SMU in 2015.
I
And
did.
when I watched it, it sent me down such a rabbit hole, because you mentioned a kid called George Nunez, who got the privilege of introducing one of the speakers at the first TED Youth conference. And it hit me straight away that, like, what an amazing opportunity to give a teenager or a kid. I don't know how old he was at that point, but like, what an amazing opportunity to give a kid to do such a thing. And then because of I carried on researching it, I discovered that was something you did a lot with the TED Youth program, that you got, got kids to introduce the speakers. So I'd love for you to explain a bit more about that, because I think that really helps people understand why you should care about being a great speaker.
Oh, that is something I'm so glad you asked me about that. I love to talk about it. It's something I'm super, I mean, it was like a life highlight for me, not even just a career highlight, getting to do that. I think I used to the co-host the TED Youth events with a spoken word artist named Reeves. And he and I just like very early on decided we wanted to, well, I mean, I think he started it really, and started to bring these kids up. And so what we would do, it was kind of it, the whole thing was about connecting the audience to the speakers on the stage and everything. So they were often adult speakers at the TED Youth events, and then a youth audience. But we would have young people in the program too, but it was mainly adults. So we would spend as much time as we could out in the room talking to the kids before the program started, and we just asked them what they were interested in, and then we'd start matching them up. And we just thought that, like, the less time we spend on stage, the better. The more stage opportunities we can give to kids in the room, the better. And they don't have to, like, they get a little nervous for sure, but they don't have that much time to freak out about it. And we were
Yeah,
there. We thought the best use of our time would be to stand backstage, helping them prep, helping them, with their intros. So they walked out there feeling great. We make sure they were having fun and felt really boosted up. But we would connect them with the speakers that we, related to what they were most interested in school, maybe. Or sometimes they were like, I don't care, I'd love to get up there. And sometimes they were like, I don't know, but I love math. And if
yeah,
there's a math person, I would love to introduce them. And so I don't know. And then they'd see other kids doing it too. So that was also really helpful. It sort of created this community feel, both among them and then in the room too. And then the speakers absolutely loved it.
yeah,
So it was really fun to see them do it, and then to see how great they felt about it afterwards. I mean, you saw, George Nunez sent me an amazing note, like,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
know, sometime after the event too, later on. And it was so impactful for him. And he said something like that was the first step in, you know, how he could think about changing the world. And I, like, imagine being
yeah,
able to impact a young person like that. Like,
yeah,
imagine, or not even not being able to, but imagine a young person being impacted like that by standing on a stage and, you know, feeling confident and making that connection.
yeah. When I saw the quote on the screen, I was like, that's why I'm writing the book. Like,
Mm,
if I had to put it into one sentence, it's like that you can do something like that, and you can change your world, or you can change the world. It's,
yeah.
I mean, there's lots of, I hate using quotes sometimes, but there's some lovely quotes around, the only reason to give a talk is to change the world. And, and I think it's true. I think, like, even if it's the world is your little working world or your village community, or, it doesn't have to be something always big and huge, but it's just that idea that if I understand how to do it well, I can stand up and I can affect how people feel about things, and that they might then take an action afterwards. And I think, yeah, for
Yeah.
someone young to see that, I think it's, yeah, very, very special. It's,
Powerful. Yeah,
yeah.
it really is.
So in terms of, obviously, TED, you were there for a very long time. You obviously had a big hand, you and the team, about selecting the talks, the speakers. And I think for me, like, it's something that's like a very huge, obvious example of, yeah, you can step onto a TED stage and whatever it is that you're passionate about, your idea, your mission, it can suddenly spread like wildfire. And I think, like, as much as it is like that, that high on a pedestal type example because it's TED, but I'd love, maybe, I don't know, like, again, I'm guess you hate this question about, like, do you remember any talks that, but, like, do you remember any specific examples of people that, like, their world totally changed after doing the TED talk, in terms of the idea spreading or their world suddenly exploding? Because I think, like, that's almost like the hyper example in a way.
I mean, there are so many examples of it, and it's really interesting. I mean, I would say, so just to back up a tiny bit, is when I started at TED, it was 2004, and the talks were not yet online.
Yeah.
So people would give talks then to an influential audience, and sort of big things would still happen in that context. It wasn't, the stakes were not as high. They didn't go in thinking that it was going to change their
Yeah.
life in the way that it did. And then they would give a talk, and still they would, find some, an investor, or somebody who got excited about their idea and said, "You're doing this, I'm doing this. Let's see if we can make something happen." And in fact, related to that, I kind of separate from TED, so I'm getting on a tangent here for just a moment, but
That's cool. Go for it.
one of the really inspiring moments in my life, my father attended TED before I did. And he one time was in an audience listening to a speaker, Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic. And he worked at a technology company at the time. And he went up to him afterwards and he said, "Hey, you're doing these dives and discoveries under the ocean. We have the technology that could help bring that to museums around the world. Let's team up." And they did. And this was in probably like 1993 or something like that. Or no, it was earlier than that. It was, because I was it was late 80s or early 90s. And they brought these live events back to the museum. And that was all museums around the world. And that was all as a result of just hearing a speaker. But at
Yeah.
TED, to get back on track, I mean, I think there are so many speakers who have had really huge life-changing moments. And it could be from, they're all getting big ideas out into the world, and they all will say things like they received many emails. I know someone who talked about, um, um, suicide, and talked about a lot of lives that saved, people who wrote to him and said that listening to the talk saved their life. So that's like
Yeah.
that's an incredible and powerful thing to hear as a speaker, like how that's like a huge way in which he was able to help someone. There are also people who have had amazing business changes. I actually am now working for a museum that is
Yes.
essentially, that exists because of a TED talk. It's a talk by a paleontologist, Ken Lacavera, who gave this talk that is about, dinosaurs and deep time, and then takes this kind of turn because it also is about extinction and the importance of preserving nature on the planet. That then ultimately, because of the TED talk, got funded into a museum that's going to open in a few months. And it's like, the museum is like, if you ever could turn a talk into a 44,000 square foot museum that you can visit lots of times and never see the same thing twice,
Yeah.
that's happening.
I love the idea of a talk turning into like a huge experience. It's
I know it. I mean, this is the first museum that I know of that kind of started out as a talk in a way.
Yeah, and to go back to your earlier on, you told the story about your father, and it reminded me almost of like the Prezi origin story, because as you know, we obviously know each other because through Prezi and TED.
Yeah.
But Adam Somlai Fisher, who is the guy who created Prezi, he found what the first co-founder for Prezi, who was sat in the audience of a talk he gave. So he was before Prezi, he was like a digital artist, and he was doing talks, and he basically coded a very rough what would eventually become Prezi as a personal tool for himself. And his co-founder, a future co-founder, was sat in the audience going, "That's amazing." And then they got talking afterwards, and yeah, and then Prezi and the 100 odd million people that ended up using it came from a talk and somebody sat in the audience. So I think, yeah, the idea of you never know who's sat in the audience is powerful.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Cool. So anything else from your TED experience that you would like to talk about connected to the impact it can have on people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I would just also say is, I think when you talk about TED, and you kind of addressed this a minute ago, like it seems like it's this grand big stage, and that probably everyone who speaks there is already famous in some way or something. And I mean, as you know, that's not really, it's not true. That TED really looks for a lot of people who are,
Yeah.
just people who have good ideas and sort of credibility to get up there and share them, and to talk about them in a way that is really giving a gift to the audience. Like, what can the audience take away from what the talk? What will they
Yeah.
walk out and think about? What will they walk out and talk about? What will they walk out and do? And I had this one kind of foundational experience at TED too, that was like, it was just an amazing part of working there, where we did this one year in 2012, preparing for the TED 2013 conference. We decided that the theme would be the young, the wise, the undiscovered. And our goal with that was to really work really hard to bring up voices from around the world that we couldn't find by reading about them and stuff. And when we thought about how we would do that, we decided to hold, in partnership with TEDx organizers around the world, we decided to hold events, in kind of audition events, in 14 different countries. And so we did that within a 3-month period. And during that 3 months, we heard from 293 different speakers. And a few of them were people that had been on our radar, but not that many. What was incredible there was really, seeing people just who applied, who wanted to give a talk, who were kind of like, all right, let's see what happens here. And, unexpectedly ended up on a stage. And a couple of times we met people in the audience who had an incredible idea, who we later, one time we met a young person at a dinner the night before, and we were like, would you come up on stage tomorrow and let us have a conversation with you?
Wow.
And another person we met afterwards at an after party one night, and she had this bag of like circuits printed onto paper, and we were like, oh, well, this was in London, and we were coming back to Europe, to Amsterdam, and we invited her to come meet us in Amsterdam and participate in that one. And she ended up on the TED main stage, and I think it's gone on to be very influential in her career, and we're still in touch.
Yeah.
But that was especially great in some ways, because they were shorter talks, and a lot of these talks are like 6 minutes, which I think sometimes people go, oh, well, it's only 6 minutes, so I don't know, I'm not going to put that much into it or whatever. I actually think that a shorter talk like that can be the most powerful
Yeah,
thing,
exactly.
and it's
The
just,
hardest one to do, because
yeah, they are so,
you've
you've got
got
to
to
put a ton of
edit.
work into that.
Yeah.
Every second counts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's like I think it was Oscar Wilde. I can't remember the quote about it. It takes 3 weeks to prepare an impromptu speech, and it's like to do something like very short and tiny. It takes a lot of planning, but
Yeah.
yeah,
It does. And it was great, because I mean, I think there were a lot of interesting things about having to, about working with that number of speakers in that short amount of time. But also just, these were all just people who were kind of like, all right, let's do it. Gonna get
yeah,
excited. It was just such a fun, lively experience that covered everything.
yeah,
And, in that 3-month period, and even in a program, they weren't stuck together by any sort of theme or anything like that. But all kinds of connections happened, and people have stayed in touch. And it was just this really amazing experience.
yeah. It definitely sounds like it, and I think I mean, I one of the questions I was going to ask is, if imagine somebody listening who's just starting out, maybe hasn't got a lot of experience in terms of speaking and stuff, like what would you advise them? How can they start? But I don't know whether that is just say yes to opportunities if they come your way or something else. So
Well,
what would you advise people?
I think that's a good question. I would say that is a way. You can also, if it's something you want to do, really, really pursuing opportunities too. I mean, pursuing TEDx's in your community is a great idea. Getting to know organizers, or if there's if there are business conferences in your field, or just really kind of doing outreach, and then thinking about. I think it's really important to think about, when you think about a talk you might want to give, who the audience in the room is going to be and how they would take in the talk, what they can gain from what
Yeah.
and then framing it that way, so that, and then talk to the organizers and stuff and get out there and practice. Even Toastmasters is really great for like getting up there and practicing. And the more you do, you are able to get out in the world, the more you kind of get comfortable, you have fun with it, you start to realize, like, okay, this joke landed, maybe this one not so much. You start to get your own rhythm and find your own style, and your own style is a really important part of it too, is just
Yeah.
being, getting to a point that you feel like you get up there and you're the most you can possibly be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think being authentic is a bit of an overused word, but it's so true. It's like I think like, and that's something I've heard time and time again. You can't copy anybody. You have to be yourself.
Yeah.
And I think like for me, when I think back to when I started, and I did the same. It was like, okay, I have two talks that I want to really. I have something I need to say, and I would just and you'll probably know this, like it was harder in the beginning when you don't have the history of doing talks and things like that. So the first one or two are the hardest ones to do. But I used to just literally any small community club group, and I would say, do you want me to come talk about storytelling? Do you want me to come, and it was just this, just do as many
Mm,
small, things that you can to, because
yeah.
it's amazing how it snowballs over time, and then more opportunities come. But it's
I think
yeah.
that's true. I actually was just thinking, I've gotten to know this woman who I met in the social audio app Clubhouse, and she was putting together these really, it was big in the pandemic, and I actually worked there for a little bit of time, and
Yes.
she was putting together these amazing rooms there about mental health, and she ended up um, she was looking to really grow her career as a speaker, and we've stayed friends since Clubhouse, and we've met in person, and she's actually attended TED and then led workshops at TED, and then gone on to be, as a result of those workshops, invited to Davos, and I think she was just recently at Cannes Lion, and she's really like on these big stages, and it was kind of just, she was putting herself in the places to be, to connect with people, to get
Yeah.
those opportunities, but also putting in the work to figure out how she could communicate, and how she could also like sort of serve what was useful to people, that she has to bring by way of workshops or whatever was needed. And then just, she's so good at it, she keeps getting invited everywhere, and her career has just really taken off.
Yeah, and you hit there on something else that I'm writing about in terms of like, one of the superpowers that speaking gives you is that, whether it's the ability to network or just easy networking. Because I always say, like, one of the best ways to meet lots of people at a conference is to be a speaker, because it's for sure you have people come up to you after the talk and they want to talk to you. But I've done it so many times where I'm just stopped for 5 minutes to grab a coffee, or I'm having my lunch, and somebody will come and tap me on the shoulder and say, I saw your talk this morning, it was amazing. And then that's it, you start talking. And I think like there's definitely this idea that the more you put yourself into environments with people and you come at it with a genuine, I'm trying to help and I have a message I want to get out there, that people normally respond to that. And it's, if you're open to just having conversations, and maybe 9 of them won't go anywhere, but it's just nice to meet people and talk. And I think it's definitely I don't know whether it's a little known effect of being a speaker, but it's definitely one that, yeah, like to your story, it can have a huge impact on people's lives.
And it also kind of it like the math of it works out really nicely because you can meet essentially everyone who's sitting in the room in a way, and sometimes people follow up afterwards. If you don't, there are only so many people you can physically talk to in a given
Yeah,
time that you're there. But if everyone has a way to reach you later, then it can go on for a long
yeah,
time, and you may hear from someone later on that you didn't have a chance to say hello to in person, that you would have never passed in the hallway. That changes your life in some positive way.
yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'm mindful of time, so I thought I'll end with one or two final things. Is there any like final thing you want to say to people, or some final piece of advice?
I mean, I think this is something, s- public speaking and presentations can help everybody, and they can also be really, really fun. And it's just worth trying. If it feels scary, figure out a way to do it that doesn't feel super overwhelming, but get started, because I think I just, I have just seen so much joy around it, so much impact. And I think so many people have a, something to say that we all need to hear and learn from, and we're all better when we can learn from each other. And whether that is, like you said at the beginning, whether that is in a small room, whether that's a presentation in a conference room, or whether it's standing up in front of an audience of 5,000 people or 200 people or whatever, there's just so much to gain from harnessing this skill and taking it forward and sharing your ideas or your work with the world, so we can all learn from each other.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's um this idea that like we all have something important to say. And I think, we're all the same. We all suffer from imposter syndrome at various times in our life. And I think like if people understand that, you would be amazed the impact you can have on people's lives when you share an idea, share a way of doing something, share a way to think about something. So I think never underestimate the power of what you know and the power of what you have inside your head. It's a big one.
Completely agree.
Cool. So I want to give you a chance to share where people can find you, connect with you, maybe even tell them a little bit about the Edelman Fossil Park and Museum in New Jersey, because
Oh,
it
great,
sounds
thank
like
you.
it's going to be a very cool thing. But yeah, so how can people connect with you and find out more?
Yeah, so I guess best thing to do is probably, I'll just give out my email. Is that something I can do? Yeah,
You can, yeah.
okay. Yeah, it's kelly@efm.org, and that's the Edelman Fossil Park and Museum, which is the Gene and Rick Edelman Fossil Park and Museum, and it's in South New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. And this, is it really is a museum kind of based upon a TED Talk in a way. It's really the life work of this paleontologist Ken Lacavera, but the museum brings you in, with the like wonder of fossils and dinosaurs in deep time, and then you learn about humans and the tiny place we occupy in space and time, and the outsized impact that we're making on the planet. And then it starts to go a little dark as you learn about extinction and prior mass extinctions and where we are now. And just as you're starting to feel hopeless, you learn about ways that you can take action, and about people who are really doing amazing work around the world, to push back on the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And the really extra cool thing there is that it's a scientifically significant fossil quarry. It's on a scientifically significant fossil quarry, and it's the only place on the entire planet where you can see the actual death layer that occurred on the day the asteroid hit the Earth 66 million years ago in Mexico. And they've found parts of Earth, there are places on the planet that exist like this, but not with this much. Um, they've had a couple of bones. This has, scientists have found over 100 different species and over 100,000 fossil specimen over 100,000 fossil specimens, right there. And you can't dig in that layer. That's for researchers, but people can come and dig for fossils too, and you can find something that no one has ever touched before or seen before or known before, when you come. And it's due to open this fall.
Fantastic. It's quite a trip from Amsterdam, but if I'm
If you're
stateside, I'm
here,
definitely coming.
please. And it's an easy train ride from New York. It's like I used to commute from Philly to New York. It's
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can take the train to Philly and head out from there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, all that's left is to say a huge thank you for sharing your time and your experience. And I am more than 100% sure that it will inspire people to think about why they should build the skill of speaking, presenting, storytelling. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's so good to see you and
Great.
reconnect.
Yes. Okay. See you again soon.
See you soon. Bye.